on Facebook very shortly. Theoretically done, and that's happening now. So I'll just turn that down. Okay. You need to, for those who haven't, you need to click on speaker view up the top right-hand corner. If you're on gallery view where you could see everyone's picture, you need to go to speaker view so that you can see my screen. And I'm about to share the PowerPoint file very shortly once I remember how to do that. Here we go, share that screen, share. So I'll just click on that to maximize it. Okay, so you should now be able to see my presentation. I'll just move a few little things out of the way here. I'll leave that there. Okay, so tonight's talk is the history of the World War II Eagle Farm Airfield area. So what I'm going to be talking about is just this sort of area here. Not the new airfield that's currently running today, but the original one, starting from its convict era right through to what's there today. So there's a plan that I got off the National Archives of Australia website. And I've put a red box around the area, roughly where I'm going to be talking about tonight. So you can see the three runways there from World War II, all the hangars down the bottom here, etc. And so, as I said, I'm starting from the convict era through to free settlement in the early 1840s, through to early aviation starting 1924, through the World War II era, 1941, December 41. Through to right through to modern days.
Could be an hour.
Someone's talking. Okay, so here's a modern overlay of what it looks like on Google Earth. Today's modern airfield is up the top, up this way, sort of northeast of the old runway areas.
Oh, cool.
And you can see Camp Doomben, Camp Ascot, and a few other World War II sites that I've got marked, including Camp Seaby just here. Where are we? Yeah, there's a little prison here, and the MPs used to live in there with their barracks. So I'll move on. So how did Eagle Farm get its name? It's assumed that the name probably came from the fact that there were a lot of sea eagles or wedge-tailed eagles seen in the area. I've done a lot of research on the history of this area using Trove newspaper, but I've never been able to find the actual origin of the name. The very first use of the name Eagle Farm I could find was in a Sydney newspaper dated the 2nd of June, 1830, so quite a while ago, in the newspaper called the Sydney Monitor.
Oh, will you eat it here?
Someone talking in the background? Moreton Bay Penal Settlement. So on the 1st of September 1824, 14 soldiers and 30 male convicts under the control of Lieutenant Henry Miller of the 40th Regiment of Foot arrived at Moreton Bay from Sydney. They initially set up their settlement at Redcliffe, but found it to be unsuitable due to lack of suitable drinking water and other issues, and they eventually relocated the following year in May 1825 to the banks of the Brisbane River in where the city area is today. In 1827, there were only 3 female convicts in the whole of the Moreton Bay area. A new commandant was there in 1829, Captain Patrick Logan. Logan City's named after him, of course. He was a bit of a tyrant. He was eventually killed by the Aborigines out towards Fernvale, I think it was. He selected a fertile site of about 228 hectares between the Brisbane River and Serpentine Creek for an agricultural establishment or a farm area. And that became known as Eagle Farm. And initially, there were only male convicts there initially growing maize. And by 1830, the following year, the farm was exporting maize to the convict colony in Sydney. What I've got here, this line here is the outline of the end of one of the runways, the World War II runways. And sitting underneath that is some of the buildings and outbuildings for the agricultural establishment where the superintendent lived, etc. And then something that I'll talk about a little bit later was this location here where the female factory and then a little bit later a female prison was erected in that location. Whoops, what have I done? Righto, sorry, I hit the B button. By 1830, some female convicts started to be doing some work, labouring at the Eagle Farm agricultural establishment. They also were forced to do pick and shovel work, making a cutting through Loudons Hill on the track from Hamilton to the ferry at Breakfast Creek down here. You can just see the Breakfast Creek Bridge down the bottom here. And Loudons Hill is this area here. So if you're familiar with driving along Kingsford Smith Drive, you'll know you go beside like a cutting where they've cut away the hill that used to run right down to the river, to the riverbank. And that was cut away by female prisoners back in the 1830s, in 1830, in fact, using picks and shovel. At the farm by January 1832, there were 680 acres, under cultivation, with 650 acres of maize and 653, should I say, and 28 acres of potatoes and some cattle and pigs. So you can see the Hamilton hotels there. This is where Brett's Wharf used to be. So there's that cutting there. I just went to Google Earth earlier today, and I see they've got a reasonably modern picture there now on Google Earth on Street View. And there's that cutting you can see over here that was cut by these women convict prisoners. On the 14th of May, 1833, there was a report in one of the Sydney newspapers which talked about a fever. It wasn't the COVID-19 virus, it was some other sort of fever. And they went on to say the prevalence of fever amongst the convicts at Moreton Bay, more particularly at the agricultural establishment called Eagle Farm, owing to the natural heat of the climate and the low habit of body of the patients. So they weren't really looking after themselves. They weren't cleaning themselves. So I see we've got 47 people logged on now. In 1835, Captain Foster Fians of the 4th Regiment of Foot took over from the then Commandant of Moreton Bay, Captain Clooney. So they had quite a turnover of commandants. Fians established a female depot at Eagle Farm in 1835, and they built some accommodation for those female convicts, and it was built such they could cope with 80 female convicts. By 1836, there had been 760 acres cleared, but only 46 acres was under cultivation by the female convicts. So there was other areas looked after by male convicts, and I'll talk about the issues that created a little bit later on. So they also worked at washing, mending clothes, cultivation of vegetables and road construction. On the 25th of March, 1836, a couple of Quakers arrived, presumably from America. George Washington Walker, there's a famous name there in the middle, and J. Backhouse. visited the Moreton Bay Penal Colony. They met up with the Commandant, Captain Foster Fiennes, who told them that at that point in time there were 400 prisoners in the whole settlement, which included 80 female prisoners. Backhouse went on to publish an account of his experiences, and he talked about the deplorable sights that he witnessed at Eagle Farm of the 40 women convicts that he saw working there in the field, some of whom were very young, while in several instances the unfortunate creatures were working in irons, so they had leg irons on them. And there are some leg irons on display at a little museum that Trade Coast Central have got there at Eagle Farm, which I'll talk about a little bit later. In June 1836, a female prison was constructed at the Eagle Farm area there, besides the women's depot, and it was made of strong timber slabs with a palisade fence with sharpened timber, standing vertical fence around the outside of that prison area. There were many problems in the Moreton Bay colony with indiscretions between the female prisoners and the male convicts, and not only that, also between the female prisoners and the military soldiers, the male soldiers. Captain Fiennes, the commandant, personally took it upon himself there at one point in time to guard the female factory in Brisbane City. That was located where today's GPO is in the city in Queen Street. So he attempted to try and stop the various indiscretions that were apparently happening. And on one occasion in August 1836, the chief constable himself was caught climbing into the Brisbane female factory, which almost started a bit of a riot between the constables and the military when that happened. Commandant Fiennes then took it upon himself to reduce the number of female prisoners. Just hang on a tick. I've got a message coming in. It's probably Bob telling me something. No, it's Don just saying he's arrived. So Fiennes then reduced the numbers of female prisoners in the town female depot down to the 14 eldest female prisoners. So to try and reduce the issue that was occurring between the female prisoners and the other male participants in the area. So the others were sent out to the Eagle Farm prison. In 1837, all female prisoners in Brisbane were relocated to Eagle Farm. In November 1838, they decided to close down the Moreton Bay Penal Settlement and turn it into a free settlement. 57 women convicts were removed from Eagle Farm by July 1839, and the new commandant at that time, Lieutenant Owen Gorman, cleared out the last remains of the Moreton Bay Penal establishment by mid-1839. I don't know if Roger Marks has logged on, but Roger from our Eagle Farm Aviation Society days drew a sketch of the superintendent's cottage, etc. And that sort of shows what it looked like during that 1830s period. There's a kitchen, dining room, drawing rooms and bedroom. And he also drew a sketch of the female factory and prison, and there was a male prisoner's hut outside that area, and the matron's quarters were outside the area as well. So you can see there was a school there because, as I said, there were some indiscretions. So some children arrived 9 months later and had to be schooled on the site. The end of the convict area by July 1839, the female factory and prison had closed and was virtually abandoned. And by about 1840, the following year, most of those buildings associated with the female factory and prison had been demolished. Between 39 and 41, The bigger area, the larger area, had become a government cattle station. One of the first free settlers in the area actually settled in one of those buildings there, and he went on to become the boss of Queensland, if you like, in charge of the Moreton Bay area, Moreton Bay settlement. So in late July 1840, Dr. Stephen Simpson came up from Sydney with William Henry Wiseman, who later went on to become the police magistrate in the Rockhampton area. They took up residence at Eagle Farm in one of the houses outside the Eagle Farm stockade, possibly in the matron's quarters, because as I said, the stockade, etc., was knocked down. Moreton Bay was declared a free settlement on the 28th of March, 1842. And on the 3rd of May, 1842, Sir George Gipps removed Lieutenant Gorman for some sort of misdemeanors. I don't know whether he was climbing over the fence as well. And he placed Dr. Simpson, who was living at Eagle Farm at that stage, in charge of the Moreton Bay settlement as the initial acting police magistrate. So it went from being a commandant to a magistrate, and he was appointed acting magistrate. On the 7th of December, 1842, they held an auction which was advertised to sell 30 parcels of land at Eagle Farm. So there was an ad put in the Sydney papers by the colonial treasurer. The upset price of land varied between 20 and 30 shillings per acre. And only 7 of the allotments were sold on the 7th of December. So they didn't sell anywhere near all of them. And the 4 allotments that cover the area that I'm talking about also did not sell, covering that agricultural establishment and the female factory and prison. Dr. Simpson held that office of police magistrate until the permanent police magistrate, Captain John Clements Wickham of Wickham Terrace fame, was appointed police magistrate in January 1843. Simpson appears to have moved from Eagle Farm, from that little cottage, out to Redbank. Heaven knows why he would have went out there at that point, era in time. Sometime after mid-January 1843, he moved into his new residence at Woogaroo sometime before May 1843, and he later went on to become the Commissioner of Crown Lands in Queensland, which was established in 1856, of course. The 4 allotments that didn't sell in that Sydney auction on the 7th of December were eventually sold over the next few years. These 4 gentlemen here bought those allotments, and I'll talk about those shortly and show you where they were in relationship to the old World War II airfield. John Hollingworth bought one allotment on the 18th of January 43. James Gibbon bought, I think it's 3 blocks from memory, on dates unknown. William Pitt Trevelyan bought a lot on the 28th of March 1843, and John Vaughan Thompson on the 6th of April 1843. By the way, all of this information that I'm giving you here, I researched using the Trove newspaper site. So this is all from Trove newspaper. Hopefully it's not fake news, as someone would say in America. So this is a sketch of the properties at the Eagle Farm area. It's an old plan dated 1842. So I mentioned these names. James Gibbon bought 3 plots, John Hollingworth, William Trevelyan, and John Vaughan Thompson. So I'll talk about each of those shortly. Initially, John Vaughan Thompson will be my first one. So he bought this block down here towards the southeast corner. And if I just go back, you can see Nudgee Road is just, for those who know the Brisbane area, Nudgee Road is just over here to the west. He was a surgeon in the British Army Medical Service. He was based in Sydney and in charge of the convict and military medical services in the colony of New South Wales. He took it on himself to be a bit clever, so he thought, and wrote to the Secretary of State for the Colonies on the 6th of April, 1843, proudly announcing that he'd purchased about 200 acres of land that he had under tillage at Eagle Farm. And he put up a proposal that he'd be most willing to accept some 10 to 20 Parkhurst boys from Britain's Parkhurst prison to work free of charge, of course, on his farm at Eagle Farm. Unfortunately for him, that proposal was not accepted by the Secretary of State for the Colonies. He remained in Sydney and did not sort of live on his land at Eagle Farm. And he died eventually on the 21st of January, 1847. Myself. That land was later purchased by John Conrad Lather, and I'll just talk a little bit about him. And he purchased the land in about 1864, 1865. He also leased 640 acres for dairying from James Gibbon. So that's one of those blocks above where he was. He fired some bricks on his property and built his house, which he called Ingall's Batch. And he had some stables which were about 100 yards to the east of the female prison. William Pitt Trevelyan bought this block down here to the southern end of the area in question. That was lot 13, which he purchased on the 28th of March, 1843. It contained outbuildings attached to Eagle Farm House. And what happened then, he subdivided that block, and one of those subdivided blocks was bought by a bloke called Morris Schneider on the 7th of November, 1863. So for those who know the area, there is a Schneider Road that runs right through that area. It sort of runs roughly here, I guess, more or less. That's the way it used to run before World War II and during World War II, but today it's actually been kicked, goes over the bridge and then goes up this way a little bit at an angle. So the alignment of that road has changed. But Morris Schneider was the stepson of Theodore Franz, and he'd come from the German settlement at Nunda, which they called the German station. He married Marianne Westaway, and they lived at his cottage, which he called Rosevale Cottage at Eagle Farm. Morris died in October 1871, and the property passed to his wife, Marianne Schneider. She died in June 1901, and it passed on to Richard Westaway and John Linton Fox in her will. And then that land was sold to Lily Davis and John Alfred Schneider, so back in the family in January 1903. And as I said, Schneider Road still runs today through that area of Eagle Farm, named after Morris Schneider. So James Gibbon bought these three blocks up the top here, the north and the northeast. I really could not find a lot on Mr. Gibbon, James Gibbon. I did find this little newspaper article, which was an advertisement inserted by Mr. White, a drayman who had rented a large paddock from Mr. Gibbon, and 250 acres, in fact, and he was after subletting that land out to anyone's horses or cows, etc., for cows for $1 a week, and etc. So that's about all I could find on him in relation to Eagle Farm. However, he was a very large landowner in the Brisbane area. He owned all of Tenerife Hill, and there's a Gibbon Street there today at Tenerife. Hollingworth, John Hollingworth, Ebbelson Hollingworth, bought that block there. It was known as Hollingworth Farm. He was in the Royal Navy, the British Navy. That was lot 11. It included Eagle Farm House and a greater part of the garden. My assumption is that Eagle Farm House was probably the superintendent's house for the Agricultural College, that northernmost set of buildings that I showed you right at the start. He lived in Surrey Hills in Sydney, in Queen Street, and he put his farm at Eagle Farm up for sale on the 9th of January, 1845. There was an agricultural dig at this location in 2005. There was a consultancy called Everett Heritage Consultants, did a lot of digging and developed a cultural heritage management plan for Trade Coast Central as part of the lead up to their development of that area. It was a joint project with the historian called Tom Blake, I think was tied up with the museum, Queensland Museum. And there are now many artefacts held by the Queensland Museum from that site. A second dig occurred on the 21st of June 2014. I actually happened to be there that day. I was invited by the Royal Queensland Historical Society to actually give this presentation or a similar presentation for a seminar that they held on site, and they had another dig to display what had been found many years earlier. So that area that was dug, so let's get our bearings. So this is the Gateway Motorway here. There's all brand new cars sitting under netting there. This is Schneider Road going through Trade Coast Central, and there's a Trade Coast Central's offices here, and their Heritage Centre is in this building, which is in the corner of a reasonably large park, this green area here. And in the park here, this is the area that I showed you on that first diagram where those buildings were. So this is the dig site that was dug on 2 occasions. And that's what it looked like when they did that second dig in June 2014. And you'll notice something pretty interesting here, which I'll talk about shortly. So there's the southern wall of the superintendent's quarters from the agricultural establishment. And if we look closer at this here, you can see the various layers of the old Eagle Farm airfield, starting with the old World War II layer here, this bottom layer. And then as the years progressed and aircraft became heavier, and then eventually we got the big heavy jets, more and more thicknesses of layer were added to that airfield to be able to support the weight of the jets. So I believe this is the 1950s runway and various layers that came after that. In February 1922, Edgar Johnson, the controller of aerodromes for the Civil Aviation Branch, arrived in the Brisbane area to choose a site for a new government aerodrome. So they were setting up aerodromes in the main capital cities. The Commonwealth Government had agreed to fund a small number of air services on certain air routes around Australia. And eventually the Commonwealth Government purchased 91 acres of land at Eagle Farm from William Lind, and David Wilson for £5,421, 13 shillings and 10 pence. Mr. Roberts won the contract to clear the site, and Captain Jack Tracy, a former World War I pilot from Rockhampton, made the first landing at site, so we believe, in his Sunbeam Avro aircraft. Eagle Farm Aerodrome, as it was initially, was a very large grassy airfield, allowing aircraft to land and take off in any direction. The Commonwealth Government called tenders for grazing rights on the large grassy area between 1923 and 1927, and thereon after that, pilots had to be very careful when they were landing at Eagle Farm. They had to do a bit of a flyover first to make sure that Charles Kenyon's cattle weren't on the landing strip that they wanted to use. In 1924, Mr. Carlson won the contract to erect a government hangar. So this was the first hangar at Eagle Farm Airfield. And he also erected a little cottage for the caretaker and groundsman, Mr. Andrew Lockland, DCM. And that work was completed in 1925. The aerodrome was officially opened then on April Fool's Day, 1925, 1st of April, 1925. Qantas opened a branch in Brisbane in 1927, and they erected that hangar there at Eagle Farm. They hired Lester Joseph Brain, who had qualified as a pilot at Point Cook, as their chief pilot, and he was the manager of the Brisbane office for Qantas. A couple of significant events that happened at Eagle Farm Airfield over the years. Charles Kingsford Smith, Ulm, Lyon and Warner landed at Eagle Farm on the 9th of June 1928 in the Southern Cross, which is still on display there. You know, hard to get to location, as we found one day when we did a site visit a year or two ago. Those guys were greeted by 25,000 people after their crossing of the Pacific Ocean. Amy Johnson arrived on the 29th of May 1930. She had 20,000 people welcomed her to watch her crash land at Eagle Farm. So she was the first woman to fly solo from England to Australia. Unfortunately, she landed in a crosswind and sort of did a bit of a crash landing in a field of millet beside the runway. And she crumpled both wings and broke a propeller off short. And her aircraft was eventually repaired by Qantas, and she later on flew on to Sydney. That's a couple of pictures. You can see the mangled wreck up the top here. Looks like a boy here skipped school to come and watch what was going on. And there's Amy Johnson proudly standing there after her ignominious arrival in Brisbane. Just a little bit of trivia. On the 31st of January 1931, they held an air pageant, or air show if you like, at Eagle Farm Airfield. This was just before it was about to close. So one of the attractions was a parachute jump from 2,000 feet by a Finnish aviator, Captain Eero. He was proudly sponsored by Rothwell's Outfitting, and they described the event as to further advertise the excellence and value represented in Rothwell's suit to measure and their famous Porro-style ready-tailored suits. I gave this talk a few years ago to, I think it was the Windsor Historical Society, and a guy jumped up in the audience and said, "My father was Mr. Porro." So apparently, as part of their advertising, they had two guys. One was called Porro and one was called Style, and they must have done some sort of skit. So this fellow's father was Mr. Porro, which everyone thought was quite hilarious in the meeting. Eagle Farm was our first airfield, official airfield in Brisbane, civilian airfield. It had a phenomenal growth in the 6 years after it was first opened on April Fool's Day, 1925. However, there were lots of issues with it. The main issue was it became very boggy in wet weather. And the other issue was it didn't allow for area for growth, for more hangars, etc. So a decision was made to move the commercial airfield, or the civilian airfield, to a new site at Archfield, some 3 times the size of Eagle Farm Airfield. And Archfield Airfield was opened on the 1st of April. There's that April Fool's Day again, 1931. So that's, 6 years later. So that first government hangar that was at Eagle Farm still exists today, but it's now located at Archfield, and that's it there on the left. So that's the original government hangar that was assembled and erected at Eagle Farm in 1925. It was erected at Archfield in April 1931. It wasn't the first hangar to be erected at Archfield. This one here was the first hangar to be erected at Archfield. And guess what? That used to be the Qantas hangar at Eagle Farm Airfield. So that's the original 1927 hangar at Archfield, which is now hangar number 4 at Archfield. A little bit more about Archfield during World War II. War broke out, as you know, in the Pacific on the 7th of December, 1941. The Americans invaded Brisbane. That was the only invasion that we ever had. They looked upon Eagle Farm Airfield as a promising location for something that they wanted to do. They wanted to develop a major aircraft erection depot near a port, and it proved suitable for what they wanted to do. So they spent a lot of money importing gravel, etc., from remote locations at Stafford and various other locations, and built up the level of the airfield area so that it no longer became boggy during wet weather. So they established that airfield and developed it starting 1942, and it went on to become a major air depot where aircraft were assembled, repaired and serviced. The American 81st Air Depot Group was the main American unit based at Eagle Farm during World War II, and they also utilised the nearby Allison engine test stands, which still exist on site today, and they're heritage listed. Just a few photos here. Here they are erecting a glider. There were a few gliders used in the Southwest Pacific area. They didn't prove to be very successful, but some of them were erected here at Eagle Farm and flown up to New Guinea. A couple of them crashed. I think one crashed near Mount Morgan, one crashed near Mackay. Couple of photos of some of the wrecks that started to accumulate as the war progressed at Eagle Farm during World War II. They look to be Airacobras, mainly there at the top. As I said, the 81st Air Depot Group was the main unit based at Eagle Farm Airfield. And if you look at the sign here, it says 81st Air Depot Group, Headquarters and Headquarters Squadron. So that was their orderly room during World War II. I've got 3 photos here of Eagle Farm Airfield. This is 1942, after they'd done a lot of work to build up the level of the airfield. You can see that there are absolutely no hangars there at that stage, and none of the storage buildings across the other side. So this is the railway line running through here beside Ascot Racetrack, as it was called then, and Doomben Racetrack. You can see that Ascot has already got some tents in it, but significantly more tents were erected later, and later on Doomben was absolutely full of tents as well. And there was another small Camp Raceview Avenue as another tented camp just in here somewhere, and there were tents everywhere. One thing to note is that Doomben Racetrack had what they called a straight 6 track. You can see this grey, not the whitey area, not the lighter area, but the grey straight racetrack. That's called the straight 6. So that was because it was 6 furlongs long. So that went on to become, if you like, the taxiway in front of the hangars that were built later on. So here we go. This is 1943. You can now see Doomben Racetrack is absolutely chock-a-block full of tents, and even tents outside the track. You can see tents over here on the other side of the railway line, more tents here. This is a stockade, a prison. Here are some US Army storage quartermaster stores. This is that Camp Raceview Avenue that I was talking about. And you can just see the edge of Headley Park storage area, which is a large American storage area. This is, I think it's Australian Army ammunition salvage area located here. But you can see other areas that the military are obviously using. This is obviously military use just here. So is this. And you can see some aircraft and some hangars, and also Hangar 7, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Okay, this is the next year, 1944. I mentioned the prison, the American stockade, where bad American prisoners were housed. The MPs that look after them lived in this 5-sided block here, which was called Camp Winstains. You can see Camp Doomben, full of tents. Camp Raceview Avenue, this little camp just here. There's that Headley Park storage area and that ammunition renovation area. And you can see a couple of buildings here, 3 buildings. They're still, well, I think they're mostly still there today, used for airport parking. So if you like, this is roughly the road alignment that goes out to the modern day airfield today. And if you go back to the left, to the west, you'll end up at Tomball Shopping Town. Down on the right here, you'll see Camp CB, the Navy Construction Battalions. This is a US Army storage area, Camp Meander, taken over by the Australian Army after World War II. And as I said before, there's Hangar number 7, where the Japanese aircraft were based. Okay, so I said that the 81st Air Depot Group was in charge of a large aircraft erection depot. It was called number 1 depot, by the way. Number 2 depot was in Townsville, sometimes called the Townsville Air Depot. But one in Brisbane was called number 1 Air Depot, or number 1 depot. So what would happen is small aircraft carriers would arrive at either Brett's Wharf or Hamilton Wharf and unload crated aircraft or semi-disassembled aircraft, or in some cases that looks like a full, I guess that's a P-47 Thunderbolt. And we've got some Lightnings here with the wings removed, being unloaded at off the USS Barnes on the 21st of July 1943. What they do then was tow them through the streets, across the railway line and into Eagle Farm Airfield for assembly, erection, testing, and then test flying, and then picked up by operational squadrons to go north. So another photo, you can see the railway line running through the back here. You can see a tented camp over to the right here. You can see the quartermaster stores on the other side of the railway line. There is a railway siding up here further off to the left, more or less in line with Hangar 7. And you can see P-38 Lightning here at the bottom left with counterweights so that it doesn't tip back on its tail, because some of the weight that's been removed from the propellers being missing, etc. And they would tow that through the local streets with this particular vehicle, tracked vehicle. Smaller aircraft were towed by jeeps, etc. So you can see P-38 Lightnings here with their wings missing, and Hangar 5 and Hangar 6 in the background. So here's one of the P-38 Lightnings on a test flight over Moreton Bay, over Stradbroke Island. Here's General Kenny in late 43, early 44, had a rush order for 100 P-47s to be delivered to an operational squadron. And here are some of those aircraft being towed through the streets of Eagle Farm, in this case Bunya Street, towards Eagle Farm Airfield to be fully erected and assembled and test flown. And here they are. This Thunderbolts were actually for the 348th Fighter Group. And here they are after they've been fully assembled and ready to be picked up at Eagle Farm Airfield by the 348th Fighter Group. You can also see there's a line of at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 P-38 Lightnings here on the left as well. Now, there's a little story here, and I got a little bit more of this story just in the last week. These fuel tanks underneath these P-47s were known as the Brisbane tank. When Kenny ordered this rush delivery of 100 Thunderbolts, they came without drop tanks, and he couldn't wait for new ones to be designed and or built in America. So he asked the local American engineering group to design a new tank, and they were built by the Ford company, which happened to be a stone's throw from Hangar 7. In fact, you could throw a stone and almost hit the Ford company building. So they received a rush order to build 200-gallon drop tanks for the P-47 Thunderbolt. And last week I was contacted by Patrick Esmond, who said that he had one of these tanks. He bought it off someone recently and sent me these photos. So the Ford company there at Eagle Farm apparently built about 3,000 of these drop tanks. So there's the Ford company building. Hangar 7 is just off to the left here. That's the building there. So you can see the building here in the middle of this red circle, and there's Hangar 7, just so you can get your bearings, and the other hangars over here. Just a few general photos. You can tell that that's Hangar 3 because it's got a little control tower on top of it. Couple of other hangars, Aircobra, a plan from the National Archives website of the World War II hangars. I've numbered them there for you. Hangar 1 was the last one to be knocked down about a bit over 2 years ago now. It was dismantled. It wasn't demolished, it was dismantled, so I don't know where it went. So the only remaining hangar is Hangar 7, which is now heritage listed, and the Brisbane City Council are spending a few $1 million refurbishing that hangar. They've repaired all the timber work in it so far, and they were going to replace the roof. I don't know whether that's happened yet, but they're doing a pretty good job. I've called in a couple of times and sort of talked my way inside and had a bit of a look around. So, okay, so that's the old gateway, not the new gateway. I think it's now called Kingsford Smith. No, it's Southern Cross Way, should I say? Sort of goes through roughly here today. So there's hangar number 3. You can clearly see, but it's got that little control tower on the top with an American crash truck out the front and a couple of aircraft inside there. So this is a photo. I don't seem to have a date on that photo, but you can see it's a fairly busy place with lots of aircraft parked out in the open here, and some more over here, and aircraft. Looks like that might be those P-38s perhaps lined up there, and here's those quartermaster storage sheds, and there's Hangar 7 just there, and the railway siding is just here. So not far from hangar number 7. So you can see Hangar 7 here. Here's that Eagle Farm railway station or siding, the railway line going through east here. And this is Schneider Road as it used to be. And it now sort of does a bit of a kick up this way. And this is the World War II Allison test stands, which still exist today and are heritage listed. So what used to happen is down not far from Albion Park Racetrack, near Breakfast Creek. It's the Brisbane River here, and that's the mouth of Breakfast Creek over here. And that famous pub, the Brecky Creek pub, is just down a little bit off the bottom of the screen here. So these two hangars or igloos that are joined together, and this igloo here, were the Allison engine overhaul sort of production run, if you like, where they overhauled Allison engines, stripped them down, put them back together, and then they sent them out to Eagle Farm to that Ellison engine test stands that I showed you in that earlier slide. Beside that was this building here, which was a US Army camouflage factory where they dyed netting and made netting and all that sort of stuff. Funny story, I gave a talk and I was talking to another group and I was talking about the Ellison engine test stands, and the guy sort of jumped up and he said, yeah, when I was young, I can remember hearing them, and you know, they used to go all night. And one night they stopped and everybody woke up because they were used to the continual drone that set them to sleep. And when they stopped in the middle of the night, everyone woke up. So I thought it was quite funny. So some photos of the open stands that they had that are still there today. And these are the enclosed stands where they tried to reduce the noise that was made by testing some of the engines. Those two buildings are still substantially there. These baffles or whatever these are at the front aren't there anymore. They're both open-ended. And what you'll find if you visit the site, Trade Coast Central, the land there has been raised by roughly 1 metre, and at this land drops, then you drop down to this land here when you visit the site. There's another view showing some of the engines there. I assume, well, not assume, General Motors were involved in assisting the 81st Air Depot Group in testing these Ellison engines here. Obviously, the 81st Air Depot Group helped supervise General Motors at Breakfast Creek there, where they were overhauling the engines as well. There's another engine getting ready to be tested at Eagle Farm. There's the crew, a mixture of civilian and 81st Air Depot Group people in front of one of the engines. That's a later photo, well after the war, 1959. I believe these buildings were used for storage at one stage. And you can see the open test stands there. And I think it was used by the fire tenders as well for the airfield at one stage. Mate of mine, some of you might know Justin Talon from America. That's Justin. He runs the Pacific Rex website. I gave him a bit of a tour of Brisbane, and we went and had a look at the Ellison engine test stands. That was before the drainage issues were resolved at that location. It's totally dry these days and all open to the public to visit. You're not allowed inside the building though, but you're welcome to walk around. So Hangar 7, I mentioned Hangar 7 was where the Japanese aircraft were based. So in early 1943, an Allied unit called the Allied Technical Air Intelligence Unit, or ATAIU, started operations in Hangar 7 at Eagle Farm. Their role was to gain intelligence on Japanese aircraft. And I'll explain what that means on another slide. They would had a number of field groups, and that included RAAF field groups, as well as American field groups. When they heard of a report of captured Japanese aircraft, these field groups would go up and recover either the aircraft or components of the aircraft. And three Japanese aircraft were rebuilt in Hangar 7, which I'll talk about shortly. As I said, ATAIU was an Allied unit, so it comprised US Army Air Force, US Navy, Royal Australian Air Force, and also some WAFs as well worked inside the hangar. So their role was to maximize intelligent information from captured Japanese aircraft. They captured they rebuilt three aircraft, a Zero, an Oscar and a Tony. And what they did was paint them up in Japanese markings and initially fly them around Brisbane, escorted by one of our aircraft so they wouldn't get shot down, and take photographs and produce aircraft recognition booklets. So they would be painted up in the markings and camouflage that we knew the Japanese were using. So quickly after they landed, should I say, they were repainted in US Army Air Force markings. So again, to minimize the chance of being shot down. They would fly these aircraft against our aircraft, against Spitfires, Lightnings, etc., Kitty Hawks, and there are plenty of files in National Archives about those testing operations to work out their performance capabilities, their top speed, how high they could climb, how tight they could turn, and work out fighter tactics so that we could shoot them out of the sky. Very difficult with a Zero, of course. They would pull these wrecks apart and thoroughly investigate the construction techniques that were used, look for fantastic innovation, and also identify weak spots that Allied aircraft could utilize to target the Japanese aircraft in these particular locations during dogfights. For instance, the Japanese, I think it was the Zero, had their fuel tank in the wing close to the fuselage, and they weren't self-sealing tanks. So if our guys were good enough shots and they could aim for that spot and hit it, there was almost certainly going to be with an incendiary round, it was almost certainly going to be a fire. So that was some of the intelligence that they gathered out of that. They analysed their armament capability and their armour protection inside, the armour plate behind the seat, etc., of the pilot. They found them to be totally ineffective, by the way. Our ammunition just went straight through their armour plating behind the pilot. One of the biggest things they did was, see these tin, they called it a tin plate, a name plate. So this is off a Zero, A6M3 Zero. They would harvest each and every nameplate that they could find anywhere on the aircraft, off engine components, off the fuselage, off the wings, off the guns, etc. Why they did this, there's a number of reasons. These nameplates gave the name of the factory and the town that factory was located in. So guess what happened? That factory got targeted and was bombed. Each of those nameplates or tin plates also contained the month and year of manufacture and a serial number. So once they had targeted a factory and bombed it, they could then look, assuming they harvest lots of these things, they could then see a gap in the times, the months and the date, and then the new serial number would start, the next consecutive number, many months later. So they could determine the impact of that bombing raid. Also knowing those dates and serial numbers, they could work out the production capability of the Japanese war machine so that we knew what we were up against. So they maximized intelligence to the nth degree out of these aircraft, and they were pretty much annoyed at their own soldiers and our soldiers as well, the Australians, who used to scavenge and souvenir nameplates off crashed Japanese aircraft. So there's a Japanese Zero flying over Brisbane. For those who are familiar with the Brisbane area, that's Redcliffe over there. There's the old Hornibrook Bridge going out there. There's the racetrack at Sandgate and the little lake at Sandgate, and that's Beams Road. I think it's Beams Road. And if I had not cropped that photo down the bottom here, you would see a large RAAF wireless bunker that was there during World War II. So here's the Zero again, flying over Brisbane on the 20th of July, 43. Captain William Farrier became the first pilot to fly the rebuilt Zero over Eagle Farm for 30 minutes. That's not on that date because it's got American markings on it. it would have Japanese markings on it when he flew it on that first occasion. There's the Tony, quite a nice looking aircraft with a German engine in it, inverted, which caused a few issues for the Japanese. And there's an Oscar there at the bottom there. And you can see that that's that Headley Park storage area that I talked about, part of Eagle Farm Airfield, one of the runways, Camp Doomben, Camp Ascot. A lot of people misidentify this as a Zero, but that's an Oscar. Main way to tell is from the back tailplane here. Just a few general photos of inside Hangar 7. There's the Zero and the Japanese markings. That's the iconic photo of the Zero parked outside of the eastern end of Hangar 7. And you can see those quartermaster stores buildings in the background across the railway line. Captain Frank T. McCoy was the guy in charge of ATAIU. They actually started initially in Melbourne, and it was down there, I think, that they started to develop a code name system for identifying Japanese aircraft, because they had a lot of trouble when people identified aircraft. They all called them a Zero or a Mitsubishi. So they decided to come up with code names, and fighter aircraft were given the male names, for example, Frank. Bombers were given female names, Betty, and transport began with the letter T. And trainer aircraft were named after trees, and gliders were given birds' names. That naming system went on to be adopted. So it was part of MacArthur's war theatre. It went on to be adopted by all the theatres of war through the Pacific and Burma and whatever. And even today, that same principle of naming aircraft is used today to identify Russian aircraft. So that was developed in Australia during World War II. That's a photo. I think Bob might have given me this photo. So there were some naval transport aircraft based here in Brisbane during World War II. The US Navy had a large presence in Brisbane during World War II. With a very large submarine base at New Farm, and lots of other destroyers, etc., and aircraft carriers coming and going in the port of Brisbane. And I do believe that's Hangar 7 in the background there. It looks like a number 7 in that photo. So a little bit on the US Navy Air Transport Service. They had 11 Douglas R4D5 aircraft of VR-13 Squadron arrived here on the 10th of July and took over 2 of the hangars at Eagle Farm. Another 5 of those turned up, along with 2 consolidated RY2 aircraft, which was a B-24 Liberator variant, arrived in August and September 44. And then eventually that squadron transferred to Los Negros in the Admiralties in November 1944. So there's an RY2 down the bottom there. 11, that's the same slide. US radar, just a few general photos here of an inspection by some of the senior officers of a radar station, radar site. Probably not an operational site. It was probably some sort of a demonstration at Eagle Farm Airfield. There's a different type of radar, very different type, used to synchronize the anti-aircraft guns. What would happen is those radars would actually move the guns. So the radar would spot the enemy aircraft and point the guns at the desired location, and the men would fire them. Righto. So after World War II, the DCA looked at Archfield, and then they looked over at Eagle Farm, and they thought, gee whiz, these Yanks have spent a lot of money getting rid of the boggy airport that we used to have, and they've put all these fantastic hangars and buildings, so we might move our civilian airline operations from Archfield to Eagle Farm. So that happened in 1949. And they obtained a lot more land, and that gave them potential for greater airport expansion and development, which you well know has happened, is still happening today. On the 15th of January 1953, the Civil Aviation Minister, Mr. Anthony, announced that Eagle Farm Aerodrome would change its name to Brisbane Aerodrome. And the airport manager, there's that guy, he was there at Eagle Farm initially, and then he moved to Archfield, and here he is again. So he said, I was there when Eagle Farm opened on the 1st of April 1925 as the official airport with dirt runways. So he got around. This is an interesting photo, and I took it on myself to add these labels. I see a few people have pinched it on Facebook. So starting at the top, you can see hangar number 1, hangar 2, hangar 3, which was, well, there's a smaller one here, 3A, Ansett, 3, Ansett Air Cargo, number 4, Ansett Terminal. So after the war, 1959, they put false ceilings and whatever inside these couple of hangars here, 3 hangars, and turned them into our airport terminals that were used in the 50s and 60s. This one was the international terminal. And this one here, you can't see the hangar because it burnt down on the 5th of September 1971. All you can see is the concrete foundation. These 3 hangars here were not there during World War II. They were relocated. I believe they may have come from Canberra. I'm not sure. Roger can tell us that at the end of the talk. Here is hangar 7, which at this time was being used by TAA. This corrugated cantilevered roof, or whatever you want to call it, hangar was originally at Archfield and was relocated to Eagle Farm after the war, and abutted up to a truncated hangar number 8 in 1949. So quite an interesting photo. So that you can see those quartermaster buildings still there, and there's the railway station opposite hangar 7. So Brisbane Aerodrome eventually closed. In the 1970s, an alternative airport site of 2,700 hectares was selected northeast of Brisbane Aerodrome. Construction commenced in May 1980, and the new Brisbane Airport was operational by March 1988, around about 8 years later. The old Brisbane Aerodrome at Eagle Farm was then closed. Today, the site is pretty much fully occupied by Trade Coast Central Industrial Park. It covers that original World War II Eagle Farm Airfield area, and that original agricultural establishment and women's female depot and prison farm. Now, I did invite Bob Tuckett, who's the general manager of Trade Coast Central, to join us tonight. I don't know whether he has, but I'll find out at the end of the talk. So hangar 7, as I said, is still standing. It's heritage listed. The Ellison engine test stands are nearby, still standing, heritage listed. And as I said, there's no visible signs except when they did the 2 archaeological digs of the former convict era buildings, etc. So Trade Coast Central, under Bob Tucker's leadership, has built a historic interpretive centre in the Heritage Park, and he's also added a number of heritage walks where you can walk around the site from the Heritage Centre in their headquarters building in the southwest corner of the park, across to or up to the convict era and look at a number of plaques, then across to the Ellison engine test stands, and then you can walk under the road bridge to hangar 7. And there are various interpretive signs in the area. There is free Wi-Fi available, and also audio talks that you can listen to as you walk around, plus a lot of display boards, etc. And you can see that Bob, being very historically minded, has also named a number of the streets in Trade Coast Central after a number of the people who were tied up with the Allied Technical Air Intelligence Unit. You can see Bill Farrier Place there. He was that first test pilot. There's also an Amy Johnson Place and a few other aviation type names in the state as well. The Heritage Centre is in the Trade Coast Central headquarters building, which is this building here on Schneider Road beside, I think it's Backhouse Drive, I think it's called. To access the Heritage Centre, you go in this set of doors just here. Around to the right here, along the side of that building, there are about 3, I think it is, cafes, a Subway, Hangar 7 cafe, and I think there's a Chinese cafe with some eating areas out here. And you can see up the top here a viewing platform where you can look out over the park where the convict area was, out over to the right here to where you can see the Allison engine test stands. And if you look back this way, you can see Hangar 7. So that building and the Heritage Centre, which you go in this building, as soon as you go in the building on the right, you'll see a real World War II Allison engine. You can smell the oil. You go up the stairs, and then the Heritage Centre is up the top here. It's quite a good Heritage Centre. You can look at the total history as I've given it, from the convict area right through the various aviation eras, including the operation of Hangar 7, etc. So this was all opened on a very, very cold, wet wind. No, it wasn't wet, I don't think, but very cold, windy day on the 17th of July, 2015. And you can see the Governor-General arrived and did the official opening a little bit late because his plane couldn't land due to the very windy conditions at the airport at that time. And here's Bob Tucker, the Managing Director of Trade Coast Central. This is just to give you an idea of the layout of some of the walking areas and the interpretive signs that have been installed. This bottom left one here is looking out towards Hangar 7, and you can access that by walking along over here and going under this road bridge and walking across to Hangar 7. So there's a lot of description boards up here, lots of photos. There's a very good video that you can run inside the building, inside the Heritage Centre. So here's Hangar 7 on the right here with a display board here. And if you walk a little bit further along up here, there's another display board with an audio button that you can press, which gives you another bit of commentary on what you can see at that site. So top left there, you can see some more of the display stands. You can see a touch screen here with a lot of audio visual stuff. Lots of signs. This area here is where there's interpretive information on the agricultural establishment and the female depot and convict area. Some icons, cutouts of the women prisoners, and a glass panel you can sort of look through to look towards where that particular building was located. And that's the end of my talk. So I'm happy to take questions. I'll just stop this share here. And if people want to unmute themselves, I'll click the unmute all. You all behave fairly well this time.
Thank you very much, Peter. Surely there'll be some questions from somebody.
Just a comment, fabulous pictures from World War II. The aircraft were fascinating, weren't they? I didn't know we had Thunderbolts in Australia.
Oh yeah, big time.
Define big time.
Oh well, they were here. They didn't necessarily operate from Australia, but they were here being built and then flown up to the operational areas.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's one you don't often see. But no, brilliant World War II photos in particular. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Peter, it's Daryl.
Yes, Daryl.
Any idea of numbers between Amberley and
an Eagle Farm or the Brisbane area numbers of aircraft?
No, not really. Do you mean numbers of aircraft that operated or were built?
Well, were assembled. Yes, I've seen estimates based on like a monthly rate, but they're American records. So
yeah,
where do you go and access?
I can give you numbers on the number of Allison engines that were overhauled, but I can't give you numbers on the number of aircraft that were built. Sorry. What you can do is go online and find, as I said, the 81st Air Depot Group was the main unit in Brisbane at Eagle Farm. There are 2 of their war books, their war history books, available online. And if anyone wants the links to those, I can find them for you. I think one of them's called "There Will Always Be an 81st." If you search for that term, you'll probably find it and download it. Quite a large file, but it's a very good book. And there is a second book as well, full of photos, by the way. I'll just see if I can find it while we're talking. That'll be right. My bloody computer's freezing up now. Hopefully you can still hear me.
Oh, yes.
Yep. Okay. I'll just see if I can find that book amongst my. Any other questions?
Peter, Phil Barbaro here.
Yep.
I've got a question. I think it was Hangar 3, if I remember rightly, that had the little control tower on the roof.
Yeah.
Do you know if that was a pre-war thing, or was it part of the wartime development?
No, well, as you've probably forgotten, but in the 1942 photo, there were no hangars there.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay, there were 0 hangars because the 2 that used to be there were at Archfield.
Yeah.
Okay, so Roger, are you Roger Marks?
No, Roger's
Can you hear me?
Roger is not here.
I was going to ask Roger.
Oh, what's going on?
I believe some of the hangars that were erected at Eagle Farm might have come from Charleville. Okay, so look, I found that that 81st Air Depot Group book. I'll just give you an idea what's in it. I'll just share that now. So there's the book, and I'll just skip through. So it's 182 pages. Oh, hang on.
You hear me, Peter?
Yeah, hang on. I've got to go back to the other screen. I'm running 2 screens tonight and I moved it across to the other screen, and when I do that, it doesn't work. Righto, so I'll just give you an idea of what's in that book. Just go through some of the pictures. There's General Kenny, of course, who had a girlfriend here in Brisbane. And General Wilson, a few of the other generals, General Connell, General Fry, who was in charge of that's their logo. So it's absolutely chock-a-block full of photos, lots of aircraft photos as well, but lots of photos of the men and women who worked at Eagle Farm Airfield. So that's available to download. And as I said, there's a later, I can't remember whether it's an earlier book or a later book of similar size, again, with lots of history and lots of photos from World War II.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I'll just stop that share, find how I can do that. There we are.
Peter,
Okay.
a comment regarding the chaps who are looking for the Japanese aircraft. You might tell them about the particular photograph shown up there of a letter from an important person. You probably know what I'm talking about. A letter from General MacArthur himself.
MacArthur, yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, you'll see it if you go to the Heritage Centre at Eagle Farm. You'll see up when you walk in there, it's at the far end on the left, a copy of what what they called a MacArthur letter. So MacArthur, because this Allied Air Intelligence Unit was very, very important to the ability to win the war because of the intelligence that they gathered, particularly the targeting information. MacArthur would write out this letter, which more or less, and give it to the men who worked in the Allied Technical Air Intelligence Unit, particularly those who went into the field. And it more or less said, give this man anything he wants. So they could show this photo to anyone and say, I want an aircraft to fly this to there. And it'd happen because he had a MacArthur letter. I want a boat to move this zero from, Milne Bay to Brisbane. Give me a boat. I want it now. So that was the value of this MacArthur letter. And you'll see that a copy of that letter in the museum.
Can you hear me now, Peter?
I can sort of just hear you, Bob.
Okay.
Keep going.
No, shut up.
Peter, it's Graham Aspinall from Townsville.
Yes.
Can you hear me, Peter?
Yes, I can. Yep.
Just a question, Peter. At the airport here in Townsville, there's some photos from the Arch Fraley collection. Arch was a photographer with the 5th Air Force in World War II. One of the photos I've seen is of an Oscar. I was just wondering, do you know if it's the same Oscar that was rebuilt at Hangar 7 at Eagle Farm? I can't remember the number that was on the tail. It might have been something like X0007 or something, but it could have been a 02. I'm not sure. Would you know if that's the same Oscar that was rebuilt at Hangar 7?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the photo. There were a number of Oscars. So the Allied Technical Air Intelligence Unit eventually moved to Hollandia, I think it was, and they rebuilt a number of other aircraft, including Oscars, and some of them flew to Australia as well. So there were about 3, I think, Oscars that were flying around Australia during World War II. So I couldn't be sure. I'd need to relook at that photo. There is another photo. I don't know whether it's one of Arch's photos, Arch Fraley, who was a well-known photographer in Townsville. Used to take my photo when I was a little boy.
Yeah, he's well known. Yep.
In Townsville. I don't know whether this photo is one of his, but there's a photo of the Zero that was rebuilt at Brisbane out there at the air depot being repaired. They had some damage to the tail wheel.
Peter, given the history that Brisbane City Council have had with preservation of historical sites, and I'm referring to the Howard Smith Wharves in particular,
Yeah.
is there any desire on Brisbane City Council's part to maintain those cliffs that were excavated by the women as historical site that they're trying to keep?
No, look, I'm not
with the redevelopment of Kingsford Smith Drive.
Yeah, I don't believe they're going to be damaged through those works, from what I could see. But no, look, I don't really know, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Peter, Bob Tucker here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, Bob. Well, welcome to our little meeting.
Thanks, mate. Just in response to that comment, that section of Kingsford Smith Drive at the moment, council are installing a lot of rock bolts into that cliff face.
Are they? Right.
To stabilise it all as they finish off that road widening.
Okay.
The other thing I was just going to comment on, when you put up the book, 81st ADG book, which is actually in the Oxley Library in Brisbane.
Right.
I noticed on the first page, when you turn it over, there was a name there, Captain B. Peterson.
Right.
And Bert Peterson was an American engineer who arrived in Melbourne about a month after Pearl Harbor was bombed. And he was given the job of establishing American bases in Australia.
Right.
And so when a decision was made to look at this site in Eagle Farm, he was sent up to look at it And then the Seabees came up, the construction battalion. They established down the road, and then they had to build it all. He was the man who had the responsibility of getting the whole base built.
Okay, right. Yeah, I haven't heard about him.
Bert, then at the end of the war, he was brought back, having done a lot of bases around the Southwest Pacific by that stage. He was brought back to Brisbane to demobilise the base, which occurred before it was sold, or the improvements were sold to the Australian government, and then subsequently became Brisbane Airport.
Ah, okay.
Bert, we hear a lot about war brides.
Yes.
Who left Australia and went back to the US with American soldiers. What we don't hear about are the American soldiers who met Australian girls, women, and stayed here.
Yeah.
And Bert was one of them.
Right. Okay.
And, he married a young lady. I think she lived at Auchenflower originally, and he retired from the US Army Air Force just after the war, and bought some land out at Sunnybank and set up a chicken farm.
Right.
And he tried making money out of chickens there for a while, but that didn't seem to turn him on too much. But he bought another little farm out there, and he subdivided it and sold bits of it off.
Yeah.
And he then realised that there was a lot more money subdividing land than there was breeding chickens and selling eggs. So he ended up becoming, probably through that period, that post-war period, the 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s, the largest land subdivider in Brisbane, developing whole suburbs.
Okay, right.
And built up a huge business in Brisbane, the Cresthaven estate out in the southeast side of Brisbane,
Yep.
suburb of Stretton,
yep.
Various others. I think he did about 9,000 housing allotments.
So,
and,
so that's him on the screen now at the bottom there.
At the bottom, yeah. And yeah, he's a captain there. He ended up a colonel. And he came from Illinois.
Yeah.
But about 2 years ago, I saw his obituary in the Courier Mail. He stayed in Brisbane. He died in Wesley Hospital 2 years ago.
Right. So he was the adjutant.
Yeah, he originally had this job of building the whole thing and pulling it all together.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Okay. Any other questions? Everyone was able to hear me okay tonight?
Yes. Yeah, it's been great, Peter.
Yes, it was very good.
Can you, can you hear me, Peter?
Yeah, Mo.
Yeah, it was really good, Peter.
It's Noel Jackling here. Can you see me as well?
No.
Is there a button that I can click to put my video on, or my camera on?
Yeah, you should be able to see a video button down the bottom left on my screen, next to the microphone button.
Is start video?
Yeah, that'll be the one.
Oh, it says unable to start video. Okay. Well, I'll just make the quick start. I'll just make the quick statement.
There you go.
On now.
You're on, Noel.
Oh, I'm on. Okay, good. Just wanted to add one tiny bit of information on the very early period. As you possibly know, my interest is in the Dutch. And in 1931, there was a flight of a Fokker trimater called the Abel Tasman from Java through to Brisbane and Sydney and Melbourne. And it was piloted by two pilots, one by the name of Jan Mol, the other by the name of Maurice Batiste.
Right.
It arrived in Brisbane on the 17th of May 1931, and it was the 18th plane ever to fly into Australia. When they got back to Java, they went to the city of Bandung, which is about an hour's flight out of Batavia, now Jakarta, and there was a very big function. And at that function, the three members of the Fokker trimater were each given a solid silver mug.
Right.
And this is the solid silver mug that was given to Jan Moll.
There you go. Very good.
So I hope you can see that all right.
Yeah, just hold it up a bit more. Yep. There you go. Excellent.
Yeah. Okay, that's my story.
Thanks for that.
Hello, it's Warwick here. I've got a question for Charles Page. Are you there, Charles? Might need to unmute the mic. I was just going to ask Charles Page what sort of aircraft is sitting in there. It's just got a little picture of himself rather than the video. No, Charles? Yeah, now you're up, Charles. What sort of aircraft are you in there?
Cat got his tongue.
No, never mind. Charles might need to unmute his mic. Never mind. Okay. Any yeses, anybody? Never mind.
Okay, any other questions?
Dion here in Melbourne. I've got a question for you. How are you going? Just pop the video on. Captain Frank McCoy, you mentioned, came up with the system of naming the enemy aircraft. And I note that it's always been mentioned that these were very much hillbilly names.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll try to start. I'll click again. With his name as McCoy, I'm just wondering if he actually had a connection to the McCoy family, as the Hatfields and the McCoys, the great family dispute there.
Don't know. Couldn't
That's
tell
the
you.
thought that occurred to me. That's all. Yeah.
But one of the aircraft was named after him, Frank. There's a
right.
There was a Frank
Thank you.
aircraft. Yeah. So
Thanks.
one of the guys, they used to, use some of their own names or names of their girlfriends. And, the Betty Bomber, it's got the big blisters on the side. That was named after a very buxom young girlfriend of one of the men there. And
I actually have a set of identification. They're copies on 8x10 photographic black and white paper. Came out of an intelligence officer's collection, and they are done up with kind of the equivalent lady, So you have the name of the aircraft with the silhouettes, and then it sometimes has a photo or like a drawing of the equivalent lady as they saw her. Or guy, which is quite interesting. Thanks.
I think McCoy should have made another system similar to that for the US Navy. Their system of designating aircraft is mind-boggling.
Yeah, I've got a lot more detail on the naming and that in a different presentation, but I didn't include that in this one because I was sort of covering a lot more info, the convict era, etc.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. We've had a lot of people. We had 48 people for quite a long time, and numbers varied a little bit, but generally had about 48 people attending tonight.